When a United States Senator locks horns with the Homeland Security Secretary over a Supreme Court ruling, you know sparks are about to fly. But this wasn't just another heated exchange on Capitol Hill, it was a direct challenge about whether America still honors the very Constitution it was built on. Senator Van Hollen demanded one clear answer: would the administration comply with a unanimous 9-0 Supreme Court decision? Instead of clarity, what he got was deflection, rhetoric, and even accusations that stretched the bounds of credibility. And that's where the debate exploded, because this wasn't simply about one man's case.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And I was glad to see in your recent testimony that you reaffirmed your obligations to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And I understand you had an exchange with Senator Murphy on the Abrego Garcia case. And so I'm just going to put the question directly to you. Are you or DHS doing anything to comply with the 9-0 Supreme Court order to facilitate his return to the United States? Just yes or no.
This administration is following all federal court orders.
Madam Secretary, this is a simple
question.
question.
It's the president's prerogative on conversations that happen
Chair,
with the president of El Salvador.
I ask a simple question. We have a limited amount of time. I just asked you, Madam Secretary, whether or not you or the Department of Homeland Security are taking any action to facilitate the 9-0 Supreme Court decision to facilitate his return. This is a very simple question. Are you taking any action to facilitate his return, or are you not?
This administration is following and complying with all federal court orders
so,
to make sure that we
So you are, because the court ordered that you facilitate his return, so you are facilitating his return.
Sir, Senator, thank you for the question, but what I would
Madam
tell you
Secretary,
is that we are following court orders,
Madam
and that your advocacy for a known terrorist is alarming
Ma
to me.
Madam Secretary,
It's alarming to me because he's a human smuggler.
Madam
he's a
Secretary,
wife
I'm going to have to
beater,
reclaim
and
my
a terrorist, and he's not a U.S. citizen. He's a citizen of El Salvador, and he's home. If he were to come back
Madam
here,
Secretary,
we would take him immediately.
all right,
back
I'm going to have
El
to, Madam Secretary, you should know a couple facts then, which is, number one, in 2019, the immigration court said that he should not be returned to El Salvador because it would put his life in danger. The Trump administration at the time did not appeal that decision. After that, he got a work permit and was working legally in the United States of America. This is also why the district court and the appellate court and the Supreme Court have ruled as they have. I suggest that rather than make these statements here, that you and the Trump administration make them in court under oath, because despite what you just said, the federal district court whose judge is hearing this case right now said, and I'm quoting, that the administration has provided no evidence linking Abrego Garcia to MS-13 or any other terrorist activity. I'm not vouching for the man. I'm vouching for his due process rights.
Yes, you are, sir. You've
No,
been
no,
vouching
no,
for
Madam
him.
Secretary, with
I would
respect.
suggest that you defend and
Madam,
stand alongside the victims of illegal crime.
This is political
in this country,
rhetoric.
the citizens who live here and are United States Americans. I would suggest you advocate for them as hard
Madam
as you do
Secretary,
for foreign terrorists.
I know you're doing a political speech
No,
here.
I'm
I
not,
get it.
sir.
I'm asking questions of law. No, you're just spewing
I
rhetoric.
truly believe this. I
Well, you're
truly believe
spewing
this
rhetoric.
as an
Let me ask
American.
you this. Do you agree with Justice Scalia in the Supreme Court opinion in Reno v. Flores that, I'm quoting, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings." End of quote.
Sir, we are utilizing every due process tool that this Congress has afforded us.
The
Congress decides what
Madam
due process
Secretary,
is appropriate for every situation. Expedited removal is a due process that you have afforded us that we are utilizing. The Alien Enemies Act
I'm going
is
to
another
reclaim my
tool that
time,
we're
Madam
utilizing.
Secretary.
So
You
we are
are,
giving due
Madam
process
Secretary.
and using the tools
Madam
that
Secretary,
this Congress has given us.
this is really, I'm asking sort of simple questions of law and simple questions like, are you complying with the 9-0 Supreme Court decision? And you seem to think that's some kind of trick question. Let me ask you this. You were down at CCOT in El Salvador, and you said, and that I'm quoting, "It is one of the tools in the toolkit that we will use." And it's well known that the Trump administration is paying the government of El Salvador to keep these individuals, including those who the U.S. courts have determined were illegally taken out of the country in violation of their due process rights. Have you seen the grant document between the United States and the government of El Salvador with respect to the CCOT?
It's important that everybody knows the consequences of what happens for their actions in this country. When you break the law and you're a member of a foreign
Madam
terrorist
Secretary, I asked you a
organization, there are
question. Have you
consequences
seen
to
the
that.
document? This is not hard.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what are the provisions of the doc? So do you know what entities in El Salvador are
Sir,
receiving
I'm
the
sure
funds?
you can see this document as well and have looked at it for
I'm
evaluation.
glad you
as
raised
well.
that, Madam Secretary, because I sent you a letter along with many of my colleagues here on April 8th asking for, among other things, that document. Will you respond to the letter that we sent?
I will respond to your letter.
Can I get some sense of when?
We will take a look at it. I don't remember seeing your letter yet, but I will certainly
Well,
take a
it's
look
been
at
there
it
over a
and send you
month.
a
The
response.
senator's time has
No,
expired.
Madam Chair.
Senator Kennedy?
Madam Chair.
Madam Secretary.
Secretary, I have some additional questions
No,
related
sir,
to
that's up
fire
to you
cap.
to manage that time. Senator Kennedy?
Madam
Well, I need a
Secretary.
little help from a chair that respects the members of the
Madam
committee. I'm sorry, Madam
Secretary.
Chair. This is
You pretty
It was about whether due process in America is real, or just a slogan politicians toss aside when it's inconvenient. The clash began with what seemed like a simple yes or no question. Senator Van Hollen asked if the Department of Homeland Security was taking action to comply with the Supreme Court's unanimous order to bring Kilmar Abrigo Garcia back to the United States. 9 justices agreed on the ruling, which is rare in today's divided political climate. But when it came time for an answer, the Secretary dodged. She insisted that the administration follows all federal court orders but never directly acknowledged whether DHS was facilitating Garcia's return. To Van Hollen, it looked like a refusal to give the one thing Congress is supposed to demand from executive officials: accountability. But this wasn't just about Kilmar Garcia. The senator made that point very clear. His real question was whether due process still carries any weight when immigrants are involved. It's easy for politicians to praise the Constitution in their speeches, but what happens when its protections apply to people without voting power or political clout? That's when, as Van Hollen pointed out, due process gets treated like an inconvenience rather than a guarantee. And that raised the stakes. Because if the government can shrug off a Supreme Court order in an immigration case, what stops them from doing the same in other cases, ones that might affect American citizens directly? The tension rose when the Secretary tried to push back, painting Garcia as a dangerous figure. She threw out terms like human smuggler and even terrorist language designed to grab headlines and stir fear. But Van Hollen wasn't buying it. He reminded her that an immigration court had already ruled Garcia would face life-threatening danger if sent back to El Salvador. That ruling wasn't appealed by the Trump administration at the time, meaning it stood uncontested. Garcia had even been granted a work permit and lived legally in the U.S. for a period. Now, despite those rulings, the Secretary was using labels to justify ignoring the court. Van Hollen pointed out that the District Court, the Appellate Court, and finally the Supreme Court had all reviewed the case and found no evidence tying Garcia to gangs or terrorism. In fact, a federal judge flat out stated that DHS had presented zero evidence to support those claims. This moment exposed one of the most common political tactics when the facts aren't on your side: throw out scary labels. Call someone a smuggler, call them a terrorist, and hope the public doesn't notice the lack of proof. But Van Hollen flipped that tactic on its head, saying he wasn't vouching for Garcia's character, he was vouching for his right to due process. That line hit hard, because in America the principle has always been that even the most unpopular individuals deserve their day in court. Without that principle, constitutional rights are nothing more than optional privileges handed out at the discretion of whoever holds power. At this point, the senator pressed the Secretary with a legal citation that left little room for spin. He referenced Justice Antonin Scalia's opinion in Reno v. Flores, a Supreme Court case that established clearly that non-citizens are entitled to due process in deportation proceedings. By bringing up Scalia, a conservative icon, Van Hollen wasn't just making a liberal argument, he was reminding the Secretary that this was settled law across the political spectrum. Her response? She claimed DHS was using every tool Congress provided, including expedited removal, which she argued counts as due process. That answer only highlighted the divide, one side viewing due process as a fundamental right, the other treating it as a procedural checkbox. Then the conversation shifted from legal theory to cold hard money. Van Hollen asked about U.S. taxpayer dollars going to programs in El Salvador, specifically something called SECOT. Reports had suggested that during the Trump years the U.S. paid the Salvadoran government to hold individuals, including those American courts had ruled were deported illegally. The senator wanted to know if DHS had seen those grant documents and whether U.S. funds were propping up a system that undermined American court rulings. The secretary admitted she had seen the documents but offered little detail. Van Hollen pointed out that he and other senators had sent her a letter requesting information months earlier, and she hadn't responded. The implication was clear: not only was the administration avoiding answers in public hearings, but it was also ignoring formal oversight requests in writing. This line of questioning cut deeper than a single immigration case. It touched on whether the United States is exporting its dirty work, using taxpayer dollars to pressure other governments to hold people that U.S. courts have said must be protected. That possibility raises a troubling picture: a government sidestepping its own constitution by outsourcing violations of due process to foreign partners. For Van Hollen, that wasn't just bad policy, it was a direct challenge to the rule of law at home. And just when the hearing reached this critical moment, political theater got in the way. Senator Kennedy jumped in, frustrated about time limits and accusing the chair of not respecting members' rights. On the surface it sounded like a scheduling squabble, but beneath that it showed how oversight hearings often turn into performances, lawmakers more focused on scoring points about procedure than drilling down on whether the administration is truly complying with the law. Kennedy had even signed the letter Van Hollen referenced demanding information on the SECOT program, yet instead of pressing for real answers in that moment, the debate turned into bickering about who got the microphone longer, and that's where the larger picture comes into focus. Across the exchange, you saw the playbook of modern politics. Officials dodge direct questions with broad reassurances. They slap scary labels on individuals to deflect attention from legal rulings. They drag out procedural arguments to run down the clock, and when cornered with facts they shift the debate to technicalities or funding details that never get fully answered. It's a cycle designed less to inform the public and more to obscure responsibility. Van Hollen's persistence cut through some of that fog. He brought receipts, court rulings, legal precedents, and official documents. He challenged the secretary not just on one case, but on whether the executive branch thinks it can ignore a unanimous Supreme Court ruling when it's politically inconvenient. And his warning resonated beyond immigration. If the government can decide due process doesn't apply here, then what prevents it from doing the same in other contexts? Rights don't vanish all at once. They erode slowly, case by case, until people wake up to find that protections they assumed were guaranteed have been hollowed out. What makes this showdown so significant is that it wasn't about ideology alone. It was about the most basic question in any democracy: does the government follow the law, even when it doesn't want to? The secretary's deflections suggested the answer might depend on the politics of the moment. Van Hollen's insistence reminded viewers that the rule of law can't survive if it's treated like a menu where officials pick and choose what to obey. So what does this all mean for the rest of us? It means that debates about immigration are often proxies for debates about rights more broadly. It means taxpayer dollars can be weaponized in ways that the public rarely sees. And it means politicians will keep using labels and rhetoric to distract from the real question: are we a nation of laws, or a nation of politics first and foremost? And here's where you come in. If due process can be ignored for one person today, what's stopping it from being ignored for you tomorrow? If taxpayer dollars are funding programs abroad that undermine U.S. courts, what does that say about accountability here at home? These are the questions we all have to wrestle with, because the answers determine whether our democracy is still anchored in the Constitution or drifting further into a system where rights exist only when convenient. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure you tap that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. The next video dives into an even more controversial exchange, and you won't want to miss it.